You're listening to Data Revolution,
the show about data, innovation, and economics in the rapidly changing cloud world.
Hey, Francesco.
Hello, Jenky.
Fancy seeing you here.
Yeah, me too.
So I heard you sat down with Matan from Clarity and Filip.
Yes, I sat down with Matan, which is a cloud DevOps engineer at Clarity, and with our lovely head of streaming, Filip Yonov. The discussion was really interesting because we were able to go back and forward about onboarding streaming. We talk about the de facto technology in this space, which is Apache Kafka. We analyze at various points in time what are the challenges for a person, a company, onboarding into Kafka. The realization is that despite Kafka being a tool that a lot of people use, it's a quite recent tool compared to standard databases. The knowledge that is available around, the skill set that are needed to manage Kafka are not widely spread across the technical community. And in the session, we will see how, for example, Ivan can help addressing some of the challenges and creating a good partnership with the people developing the solution.
Well, I know the challenges with Apache Kafka are very real in the industry, so I'm really excited to check this episode out.
Matan, Filip, it's a pleasure having you here. I believe I'm really keen on talking to you about the challenges and possibly also the solutions of streaming in the cloud. Matan, I would like to start with you. Give me a definition of streaming and what are some of the obstacles you can find in your way into streaming?
Sure. So streaming basically means processing real-time data as soon as it comes to the system. You can think of it like a flow of messages that comes in and you need to process and analyze it as soon as you can without delaying the processing rate and the processing level. When we are talking about streaming applications, we basically mean to microservices and applications that read and write data to a Kafka cluster or to any specific streaming platform there is. This can be used to enable event-driven architecture or any real-time analysis systems. And I think that the main pain points or the obstacle that new organizations have with streaming, the first one, I think it's the lack of knowledge. When we are talking about Kafka, it's not a common knowledge. It's not a database. It's not a queue manager. It's not commonly learned in like 101 courses. And it has a learning curve. Like if you are a new guy, you probably know how to do a select query from a database, but you probably don't know how to do it in a Kafka. And the second thing, I think, is scaling. Because when we are working with Kafka, we are working with distributed system, which means there are a lot of components that speak to each other, like the nodes, the topics, the partitions. And you need to know when and why you are scaling them up, or why you need to resize, or even how to resize. How do you measure what size do you need for the Kafka cluster? So that's also something that should be learned and considered. And that's important to know the visibility aspects of Kafka. On how to do that right, because sometimes it's not the infrastructure faults that you are using it incorrectly in your applications. And the third thing, I guess, is relating to the first point, it's the management. Like, how do you manage your daily routines or your daily operations to a Kafka cluster? How you do health check, what metrics do you need to look at? It's another obstacle that Kafka managers should know how to work with it.
Yeah, I believe there are two key themes there. One is about Kafka compared to databases as quite a new technology, like Postgres or Oracle or whatever you use as a database was there in the 70s, 80s, while Kafka was started in 2006, if I remember.
So I think it's 14 years old now.
Yeah, so it's really recent. So what also you can expect from people, at university or high school, they might know something about databases, but not about streaming applications or stream processing. The other bit that you mentioned that is also, I believe, interesting is the fact that there are different ways to approach Kafka. You can do self-manage, you can use tools like Ivan to manage it for you, but still, they will do part of the job. It's a shared responsibility where you still have to, first of all, understand what you are looking at, and then understand which metrics can support your journey in order to understand how to optimize all the workloads that you have. Filip, to you, what else? what are the other challenges that, from your side, you see in the industry approaching Kafka?
Yeah, there are two sides of it. There is the undifferentiated heavy lift to run a streaming system and the differentiated heavy lift. And let's take first, the undifferentiated. How do you run it? How do you optimize it? How to make sure that you get the maximum from it, right? In whatever business context you're putting the streaming system. And we discussed already, Kafka is, I don't know, many years old already. This hasn't really changed much in terms of making it easy to operate. There are so many knobs in Kafka and configurations, and they're rightfully there, right? It was conceived in the era of the data center. But in the cloud era, many of those knobs don't really need to be there anymore, simply because the cloud takes care of this. Or a managed service provider like Ivan, right? We don't really ask you to do many things beyond the let's say the basics. Now, what this actually means, if you start or addressing the undifferentiated heavy lift, you by definition have more time for the differentiated heavy lift. I call this work downstream of Kafka. Most of the logic on Kafka resides actually in the consumer, right? Or at least this is how it's supposed to be. We've seen other things and the different use cases when this is not the case, but generally this is true. What this means is that you have more time to spend on your business logic. It means that you can actually focusing on helping the business teams downstream of Kafka make better business decisions or improve the latency or improve the speed of decision making and unlock those preventive, proactive use cases for which actually Kafka is the perfect fit. I think this is kind of the equation we work with, right? And our industry is trying to remove as much as possible from the undifferentiated heavy lift into the differentiated work.
Yeah, I believe that there is a good point there about being able to focus on what matters. Like the cloud is something that goes into that direction, but for kind of complex technologies like Kafka, there is still quite a bit to do in order to simplify the overall management. Because as you said, Filip, there is a lot of logic which is on the outside of Kafka. Is it producing the data? Is it consuming the data? But then there is also a lot of logic that you need to check and you can tune inside Kafka itself. So understanding where the perfect match is kind of complex still. I want to double down on Matan with you. We talk about streaming and the streaming definition, but why is it relevant for you? Why is it relevant for you and Clarity, your organization?
Cloud is a global cybersecurity company focused on helping critical infrastructure organizations, basically to protect the devices, protect the physical devices from cybersecurity attacks. Our customers and our organizations that we support basically are, as I said, critical infrastructure, which means they are factories and plants and healthcare systems and hospitals and banks. And all of these are really important for our day-to-day life. That's what we protect. And we are helping them to protect their physical devices, like medical devices, IoT, and stuff like this. And basically, we can give them in real time, I can tell them what vulnerabilities they have, what network configuration they lack, and we can really help them to protect their environments.
Okay, all these use cases that you mentioned and the environment where you are operating seems like mission critical and real time, the perfect definition of real time mission critical use case. Can you elaborate a little bit about your journey into Kafka so far? What have been the hurdles that you found in the way?
As I said, we are using the stream data from our customers. So basically, we are pushing and producing the data into Kafka clusters. And I think that one of the main challenges that we had when we worked on that is really how do you auto-scaling your applications based on the producing and consuming rates to and from the Kafka cluster, which means that if I have a lot of data that comes into the cluster, then I want to be able to consume faster, to have better consuming rates in order to be able to keep up with the amount of data that comes into the cluster. And Kafka doesn't always expose those metrics out of the box. So sometimes we need to calculate them internally and do some custom metrics. But on some of these metrics, we paired with Ivan in order that they can build that features for us.
Yeah, an interesting point there. So Kafka, it's a distributed system by nature,
Yeah.
but it's up to you to scale it up and scale it down,
Yeah.
in theory. And from my knowledge of Ivan, we don't have an auto-scaling logic. Philip, do we?
I'll be a product manager for a second, and I'll tell you that we have programmatic scaling. But this is just a fancy term for you do it yourself. And we will offer you the way to scale it. But this is not necessarily the reality we want to live in the future, right? This is just something which is the current constraint. And what we need to understand something here is the following. Ivan provides dedicated enterprise-grade cloud Kafka clusters. These are not multi-tenant clusters. The cluster is yours. The overall infra is yours, in this case, and managed by us. We provide several models, right? You have the normal, let's say, software as a service model, and of course the more novel one, which is the bring your own cloud in a productized form. But in any case, we are talking about primitives which you own at the end of the day, or you can actually act and exercise ownership over. So we don't really limit you beyond just the safety of the cluster. When it comes to, let's say, limitations, we don't impose any partition limitations on you. We don't impose connection limitations on you, etc. And in such a context, when we talk about those heavy-duty industrial-grade clusters, having a safe way to auto-scale is not a trivial problem to solve. I don't say that it's not solvable because we already have solutions out there in the market which do that, right? But we want to do it in an extremely safe and predictable way. So yes, today, as I mentioned, it's programmatic, but probably soon we will get more in our pipeline.
Can I ask a follow-up question
Sure.
to you, Philip? So probably what we were working with Clarity was about finding an auto-scaling solution that was working for you, not a global auto-scaling solution, because it's to me, it feels like, yes, we want to automate, but on what we decide, it's important.
Yeah. If I'm not solving customer problems as a product manager, I'm usually wasting my time. Matan and the team came with a very cool problem, which was an absolute mandatory, right, for their own operation, because they also have a very elaborate and sophisticated Kubernetes implementation in the form of KEDA, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And basically to implement this, they needed the set of capabilities which were lacking at the time to provide and feed the necessary data and information and thresholds, which are intelligent, by the way, to allow for, let's say, auto-scaling events on the consumer side to take place. Put it in plain English, whenever we feel that the consumers are up to speed and everything is flowing normally, the system may decide that it's time to scale down or, let's say, right scale, right, towards the workloads. In that way, you provide much more granular control over the resources on the consumer side. And Ivan just exposed the capability to give the necessary metrics to take those decisions for scaling.
Okay, that's interesting. I believe allowing the customer to define the scaling logic based on metrics and exposing all the basic metrics or advanced metrics so they can make a better decision is kind of critical. We are giving you all the information that you need to make your decision. Matan, back to you. I believe this kind of auto-scaling was the first problem. Maybe you were probably, using Kafka somewhere else and you wanted to onboard in Ivan. And with what Filip said, auto-scaling, it's somehow there.
Done.
Okay, so what's the next step? What are the next step or the next challenge that you faced?
You basically need to know Kafka in order to know how to solve its problems. So in the management side, as I said, there is a learning curve. For a new organization, for a new Kafka manager, there is a learning curve that he needs to go through in order to operate and save his Kafka from bad things to happen. And also scaling, like you need to reach size and right size all the time. You need to keep up with the amount of data that is being sent by the customers. And because we are talking about streaming data, that means a lot of data that comes and you need to right size all the time. I'm not saying that I'm doing it on a daily basis, but I'm doing it a lot.
Well, but like the cool bit about data is that you basically don't know how much.
Exactly. You don't know how much, what size of cluster you need at a given time. And that's something that you learn as time goes. when you're working with Kafka, there is a shared responsibility model for different vendors, which means everyone owns a different part of the system. When we're talking about Kafka, we're talking about the nodes and the topics and the partition and basically the data itself. So if I'm responsible for the data that is being sent to the Kafka cluster, I own, for example, what distribution it has, like whether it used round robin mechanism or whether I'm using a key partition. But for example, on the other side, I do not own the responsibility to how to distribute the partitions on the Kafka. So that's something that in this case, Ivan is responsible for. And also I think in a world where we are working in cross-cloud platforms or multiple cloud providers, it's important to have some unified system in order to operate your cluster, because every vendor can maybe create a different Kafka cluster or how it wants to own it. So I think it's important to have a unified solution for that.
Yeah, I believe you made a couple of good points there. The first one being, yes, you still have parts to do.
Yeah.
So you said about, producing the data and defining in which topic and in which partition based on a key, based on round robin, so randomly. And then having other parts of the system taken care by Ivan in our case, like, partition assignment, rebalancing, all these kind of things. It's complex, but at the same time, we're going back to what you were saying before, having the metrics to understand what's going on allows you to, be on the safe side, understand the behavior of the system, even if it's composed by multiple nodes across, regions and stuff like this. The other point that you made was about cross-cloud and standard definition of APIs. I believe a lot of people use Kafka just because it's the default API, but then that allows you to produce and consume from Kafka with standard APIs, but the management of Kafka itself, well, it depends by the provider or if you just use your own. So addressing all these points, Filip, please.
Yeah, many things here to unpack. Let's start from the top down. I also agree that we will be observing in the future actually even further standardization of the streaming system, and the Kafka API will probably become it's already the default, but what I'm actually trying to kind of convey here is probably to not even be challenged. What we will see is a lot of technology changes under the hood, but the API as a standard will stay, simply because the adoption is just amazing. It's more than 80% of all the S&P 500 companies are using Kafka in one way, shape, or form. Now, going down this path, if Kafka is the default API, what about the cloud bit, right? Kafka today is still not modernized enough, in my view. What this actually means is that Kafka isn't really cloud native today. It's referencing an aging design, which we already discussed earlier in the episode, where it's almost 15 years old. We will see more and more evolution towards actually making it more cloud native. One of the really important bits, which I believe is not very much discussed in our industry, is what cloud native really is. Many of the industry players are discussing consumption-based, scalable, elastic are the main characteristics of cloud native, but I would also argue that cross-cloud is also cloud native. What this means is that you can have extreme level of portability of the streaming system, because cloud is just yet another layer of the infrastructure. So being commoditized, available, and easily portable is something super important to claim actually cloud native capability. So I would be very much looking forward to having those being sorted out at scale, so that porting a Kafka, for example, will be as easy as just clicking a button.
That kind of it is with Ivan, but not with everybody.
That's very, very true. Yes, we have been spending a lot of engineering hours of making it extremely smooth experience, because first and foremost, we believe actually in the open door policy. You can always move anywhere you want based on the context you operate as a business, because we believe this is the maximum business value we can actually provide to your, let's say, context you operate in.
Yeah, I believe now in this time of AI and new models, new features, new players coming into the market at a pace that we never saw before, you know where your data is sitting now, but not where you want to take it next. And being able to mix in the replies from you to have the ability to seamlessly take the data somewhere else if needed, to move workloads, to move the data in a safe and highly throughput and secure way, it will become critical. It is critical. We touch a lot with Matan, your experience about onboarding Kafka and then the challenges about autoscaling and cross-cloud replication or working cross-cloud and having unique APIs. What else is in your Kafka journey, in your streaming journey?
Yes, so we are using Ivan's managed service in order to run our Kafka cluster inside a BYOC setup, which means that we give you our AWS account and you deploy and run the Kafka cluster inside our accounts. And basically we are forced to do that because we should comply and we need to comply to regulations. Because we are processing sensitive data, that means we can't expose the data outside of our account and we can't send it outside of the account. Basically, it also enables us to use multiple features in order to cut our cloud costs. Basically, we can use saving plans to save money, and we have an EDP programming in our AWS account. And we also have credits that we can use in our accounts. And there is also, we talked about the shared responsibility model before, and I think that it's good that we have another pair of eyes to look into our problems, because Ivan helps us to acknowledge problems, to solve problems that we have. I think it's good for both of our companies that we have this partnership.
You touch about partnership.
Yeah.
We are both learning from each other because we have a variety of use cases on top of Ivan for Kafka, Ivan for Apache Kafka, but then your case is similar to others but different. So it's a learning experience both from us managing a diverse set of workloads, but as well for you that you are buying not only a service, you are buying also the experience from the company. Filip, BYOC, bring your own cloud. Seems like an interesting solution for companies like Clarity. How do you see the future of it and its appeal to cloud customers?
I think the future for bring your own cloud is bright. And I don't want to really anchor myself into the present. What we are seeing today and the model we actually use started with a very simple solution in mind. Matan already mentioned it. Bring your own cloud existed to begin with to solve for compliance and sovereignty issues. Companies which were with sensitive data allowed companies like Ivan to actually come in and deploy certain services, but the data plane was actually on the customer premise and in their account. But I think we are just at the beginning of the journey. We already see a massive productization effort across the industry of making Bring Your Own Cloud much more self-service, because let's face it, Bring Your Own Cloud setup is not easy, it's not trivial today. It takes time, it takes effort. There's so many things to actually go wrong, right? And it's the objective reality. But the objective reality provides a very interesting challenge for companies like Ivan to actually productize this and take care of it in a self-service manner to the point which the setup is actually trivial. But if you ask me really about the future, beyond the productization, beyond the self-service, we are actually looking into, let's call them Bring Your Own Cloud Generation 2 models, which is much closer to some kind of a hybrid between a software as a service, which is basically the traditional way of managed Kafka service, and the Bring Your Own Cloud, where we combine best of both worlds. For example, you will be able to offer a control plane, right, where it's basically taking care of all the metadata, while the customer is able to bring their bucket. So bring your BYOB, if you will, which is, bringing, let's say, the object store or certain, storage mechanisms to take care of the other piece of the puzzle. So I'm very much looking forward to those models. We already see some in the industry, some inklings also of potential viability towards this model. And I'm pretty excited because we will be able to combine what Matan said, all the EDPs, all the savings plans which the customers are having. And let's not forget that this was a very massive push towards bring your own cloud. Those savings plans prompted a lot of our customers to say, hey, can I actually lean into my discounts? Can I actually lean into the allowance I actually have from the cloud provider and utilize it more efficiently? And last but not least, productization apart and innovation apart, it's also about the model. The model here is not of a pure service. I think you mentioned it in your question. It's more of a partnership. We actually can work together to get the most out of your streaming service, because we are way past the point of just pushing some bytes through a broker, right? We want to actually help solve business problems with streaming data.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe there is, I believe, a nice analogy from the bring your own bucket. We are ready to pump the data. You just bring, the bucket from home and then decide where to place it.
Absolutely.
We touched with you, Matan, the future. I believe with Filip, we touched the future. Now back to you, Matan. I would like to ask you, what is in your wish list for Kafka and for streaming?
I really hope to see some integrations between maybe AI with Kafka. I think that it can be very interesting to see what AI can tell me about my Kafka cluster, maybe how to manage it better. Because Kafka has so many components, I think that if it can tell me like what the bigger picture looks like what can I do better, even in my infra side, not even the application side or on the data side, but just tell me should I operate the Kafka better. I think that it's going to be great. I know that it already happens in some ways in Postgres, but I hope to see that also in Kafka too. And I think the second thing that I'm really eager to see is that improvement in the Kafka management toolings. I think that we spoke a lot about metrics and visibility, and I think that's a key factor and a key component to be a better Kafka manager. If we will have better visibility on these topics, then I think it can be really helpful for many Kafka managers.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that you touch really two good topics there. The first one being, AI.
Everybody wants AI.
Of course, everybody needs to talk to AI at least once per episode. And as you mentioned, what we have as of now in Ivan is what we called Ivan AI Database Optimizer, coming from the EverSQL acquisition, and that allows to do basically what you said, giving you suggestion on how to optimize your workloads on a database. Extending that idea to complex systems like Kafka, well, could save a lot of engineering hours and effort. And the other bit is still you want to be able to understand metrics and how they impact your business. Because, you can provide a good service only if you have accurate visibility of what's going on. Filip, what's in your wish list?
I can talk for a full episode.
Well, you don't have 40 minutes.
Yeah, unfortunately I don't, but I'll try to be very brief. In my planning priorities for the whole year, I call what Matan was touching upon in terms of AI optimizations, I call it Kafka without the manual. Can we actually reduce and lower the barrier to stream, number one? Can we reduce the pain of customers? Because the hardest thing about data streaming is not data streaming. It's everything around it. It's the producer, it's the consumer, it's the integrations, the schema registry. Can we actually make it just work, right? That's one of the angles and this is very much on my wish list, and I'm very happy to say that we will be working on this. The other piece of the puzzle for me is that Kafka is still premium data. If you compare it to something like S3, for example, just pushing data there is orders of magnitude cheaper to transmit the data, to store the data, and to read the data, compared to, let's say, pushing this through a Kafka cluster. And this is driven by the aging design of Kafka itself, right? So my wish list is on my wish list is, can we make Kafka 80-90% cheaper for the future? Because this will really unlock the mainstream of users, in my opinion, and it will be extremely beneficial for businesses and their users because they will get more real time out of the box.
part of me is happy because more or less you have some of your wish list in your hands or closer hands.
Yeah.
It's also showcasing the good value of using an open source tool.
Yeah.
You don't have everything on your hands because there is a community that is working to innovate the entire project. So, Filip, Matan, it was a real pleasure talking to you about challenges and solutions. I believe you did a lot of progress with Clarity and your
Yeah.
streaming journey, and I hope the best for your streaming future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, that was a really great discussion that you had with Filip and Matan. I personally found the auto scaling discussion really interesting, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, it's really also my favorite part of the discussion. What it showed is that companies are not only working in a vendor-client relationship, but working as a partner. Matan need was to have an auto-scaling logic. Ivan at the time didn't have an auto-scaling logic. So we worked to understand not how to build a generic auto-scaling logic, but how to build a auto-scaling logic or a scaling logic that was following and satisfying the request of the client. It's a learning experience both sides because on one side, Clarity learned how to implement or what are the decisions behind implementing an auto-scaling logic. On the other side, also Ivan learned that the peculiar requirements of Clarity in this kind of environment. So I believe this kind of partner agreement rather than supplier and consumer of a Kafka solution in this case is kind of a game changer in the field.
Yeah, and I really like the fact that you said partner relationship because you talked about a lot of obstacles with Matan and Filip, and it really takes a true partner to be able to find the right solutions when using Kafka.
Matan made a very good point. It's much easier to find people that can write a SQL query than people that can write or consume Kafka messages or work with Kafka. Despite the maturity of the Kafka solution being there, because it's a 16 years old project, there is not as much information, or I would say is not as mature, for example, in university. I don't know, but probably there is a lot of people learning databases at university. I don't know how many of them are learning streaming solutions. So I would say that what I saw is that basically in Matan words, where you buy a solution from a vendor like Ivan, you are not only purchasing a piece of software, a license, you are purchasing a piece of software together with the experience, the knowledge that this partner can provide you. And the partner doesn't only provide you the 99.99% available Kafka, but also allows you to increase your knowledge, increase your way of managing your streaming application, and at the end of the day, reducing the risk of a certain project or a certain critical piece of your data infrastructure to fail. Because, as Matan said, they are receiving and sending pretty important information. So the criticality of Kafka for them is really, really huge.
Definitely. And honestly, reducing risk is the number one thing for everyone in the industry, right? Like, how do you reduce risk? So, I mean, I'm glad you were able to sit down with them and we were able to dive deep in this subject. So, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenki.